My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 34, a single mom, and a registered trauma nurse in Phoenix, Arizona. And the day my parents quietly moved my son's beds out of their rooms to make space for my brother's baby was the day I realized we'd been exiled from the family long before that. Let me tell you something about betrayal. It doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it whispers through ignored glances, silent comparisons, and the way people pretend your children don't exist. 2 years ago, I packed up my life after the divorce and moved into my parents' home with my two sons, Caleb and Mason twins, both 10 years old at the time. I was heartbroken, financially cornered, and working double shifts at a level 1 trauma center just to stay afloat. My parents, Diane and Gerald, offered to take us in for a while. Their words, I wanted to believe we were welcome. For the first few months, I tried to ignore the subtle comments. The way my dad would reminisce about how focused and fearless my younger brother Tyler had always been, even when I'd just shared that Mason made the honor roll. The way my mother always made room on the fridge for Tyler's wedding photos, but quietly removed the boys' drawings to make space. But I bit my tongue. I worked extra shifts. I paid for groceries. I cooked dinner even after 12-hour days. I raised my kids to be respectful, not take up space. We shared the upstairs guest room while Tyler and his wife Harper visited every few weekends with their infant son Levi. And then something shifted. Tyler and Harper started visiting more, then staying over. Then one day, during breakfast, Harper casually announced, "We're thinking of moving in while our place gets remodeled, just for a couple of weeks." I remember glancing at my mom thinking she'd at least ask how I felt, but instead she smiled and said, "Of course, honey. This house has always been yours too." Ours, no one had said that to me, but I said nothing, again. Because I thought we'd just need a few more months. I'd almost saved enough for a deposit on a small place nearby. Caleb and Mason had a chart on our bedroom wall, a colorful countdown to our own home. It was supposed to be our Christmas surprise. But Christmas never came for us. Harper brought Levi's crib and diaper station and baby monitors. My sons' shared room slowly morphed into a shrine for their cousin. And I watched in silence as the home that once sheltered us turned into a stage where we were merely tolerated. The boys began whispering, instead of laughing, asking for permission to play in the yard, and apologizing for existing too loudly. And I, the daughter who came home after losing everything, became invisible, again. If you've ever had to shrink yourself just to survive in your own family, if you've ever seen your child wonder why love comes in unequal portions, leave a like and stay with me. Because what came next, no one in that house saw coming. And I didn't just leave. I made sure they remembered why. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about reclaiming space dignity and the quiet raging fire of a mother who's had enough. Let's begin. I remember the first time I noticed something had shifted permanently. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The boys were working on a school project at the dining table, laughing softly over markers and cardboard. I had just come off a night shift and was sipping black coffee, bleary-eyed but content watching them. That's when my mother walked in with Harper and baby Levi, arms full of decorative pillows. "We're going to spruce up the dining room," she said casually, ignoring the project laid out across the table. Harper thought this corner would be perfect for Levi's playpen. Mason looked up confused. "But we're using the table." Harper gave him a tight smile. "Sweetie, you can move it to the floor. Levi needs his space too." And just like that, my kids were displaced again. I stood there stunned, wanting to object but knowing exactly how it would go. I'd be called dramatic, overly sensitive. The bitter single mom act was always waiting in the wings for me. This pattern, subtle, unspoken, unchallenged, became our new normal. Tyler and Harper began leaving Levi's toys scattered everywhere in the kitchen and the hallway on the stairs. My kids, meanwhile, were reprimanded for leaving a sock on the couch. Harper took over the living room TV, insisting she needed background noise, while Levi napped, meaning Caleb and Mason couldn't watch their after-school shows anymore. They started spending more time in our cramped bedroom drawing in silence or watching videos on a shared tablet. Caleb stopped asking if Grandpa would help him with his science project. Mason no longer showed off his soccer ribbons. It was as if they understood intuitively that no one here wanted to hear about their little victories anymore. One evening, Caleb came to me with a hesitant smile. "Mom, can we put the savings chart back up?" he whispered. "What do you mean it's still on the bathroom door?" He looked down. "Grandpa took it down today, said it made the hallway look messy." My heart cracked. That chart was our hope, each little star a symbol of our progress. It was all we had to show them that this wasn't forever, that we were going somewhere. I replaced it that night, quietly, without discussion, but something shifted in me. Tyler, meanwhile, was hailed like a prince. He was the golden son who could do no wrong. Never mind that he and Harper hadn't paid rent or groceries since they arrived. Never mind that he spent hours on video games while my kids washed their own dishes and folded their own clothes without complaint. The favoritism wasn't new, it had been there since childhood. I was the planner, the rule follower, the steady one. Tyler was the risk taker, the visionary, the screw-up who got second, third, and fourth chances. But now it wasn't just me being dismissed, it was my children, and that I couldn't stomach. Still, I didn't say anything, not yet, because I needed more time. The housing market in Phoenix was brutal. I had calculated every shift, every dollar, every overtime opportunity to ensure we could afford even a modest two-bedroom rental. I clipped coupons, sold unused clothes online, skipped lunches to save gas money. The boys knew we were close. 5 more weeks, I had whispered to them after a long shift. 5 more weeks, and we'll be free. But as Tyler's presence grew, so did their entitlement. My parents began acting like our stay was somehow inconvenient, as if we had overstayed an imaginary welcome. My dad started making snide comments at dinner. Some people just don't know how to move on. My mother dropped passive-aggressive hints about expecting guests for the holidays and needing space. Funny how no one ever said that when it came to Tyler. The moment that sealed everything, though, was small, insidious. Mason came home with a hand-drawn comic he'd been working on for weeks. A story about 2 boys who discover a tree that grows doors to magical places. He proudly offered it to my mother. She barely looked at it before saying, "That's nice, sweetie. Can you take it to your room? We just cleaned the counter." And then she turned to Levi, cooing, "You're gonna be our little artist, aren't you?" That night, Mason cried quietly into his pillow. I sat beside him, heart thudding with a rage I could barely contain. This wasn't about space anymore. It wasn't even about respect. It was about the message being sent to my sons over and over again. "You don't matter here." And I was done letting them believe that. By the time Halloween rolled around, my boys didn't even ask if we could decorate. That used to be their favorite holiday: cardboard ghosts, paper pumpkins, silly homemade costumes. But this year, Levi's baby sensory space had replaced their spot by the front window. The storage boxes of our old decorations were buried somewhere in the garage behind Harper's seasonal bins, labeled in pink Sharpie. I found Caleb curled up on the carpet one afternoon, sketching jack-o'-lanterns in his notebook instead of asking to carve one. "Do you want to go out and buy pumpkins?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "It's okay. I know Grandma doesn't like the mess." That moment hit me harder than I expected. My son, 10 years old, already learning to keep his joy small, contained. Already convinced his excitement was an inconvenience. Meanwhile, Harper was busy planning Levi's first Halloween photo session. She had 3 costume options for him: a lion, a bumblebee, and a miniature cowboy complete with fringe. My mother squealed over each one like they were Oscar-worthy. My sons didn't even get a, "What are you thinking of being this year?" They stopped asking for candy, stopped talking about costumes, stopped celebrating. And I started counting the days. It wasn't just the favoritism, it was the erasure. My kids were being erased one subtle act at a time. Their drawings disappeared from the fridge. Their names weren't included in family group texts. When Harper posted photos online from Sunday dinners, my children were cropped out, or not in the frame at all. One Sunday we sat at the dining table while Tyler and Harper told everyone about Levi's first steps, which had supposedly happened that morning. My dad beamed. My mother got misty-eyed. Tyler raised a glass. "To the next generation." No one looked at my sons. No one asked them how their week was. No one noticed Mason hadn't spoken all dinner. It wasn't until later that night when I went to check on him that he broke. "I think I'm invisible, Mom," he said, eyes wet but voice calm. "It's like I'm not really here." That sentence crushed something in me. I wrapped him in my arms and whispered, "You're not invisible to me. You never will be." But it wasn't enough. It wasn't changing anything. They still lived in that house. They still heard the quiet messages every day. "You're not important. You're not wanted. You're not him." And that's when I made the decision. I called a realtor friend the next day on my lunch break. Her name was Naomi, and she was the kind of person who got things done without judgment. I told her I don't care if it's small. I just need it to be safe. I need a door that locks behind us and walls that don't whisper lies. She understood immediately. Within a week, she'd found a modest 2-bedroom rental 10 minutes from the hospital. It wasn't fancy. The carpets were outdated and the backyard was mostly dirt. But it had sunlight. It had potential. And most importantly, it had no one else's name on the lease. I applied, I was approved, I signed the lease, move-in date November 1st. But I didn't tell the boys. Not yet. I needed everything ready first. I wanted to give them hope, not false promises. They'd already had enough of those. So I worked more shifts. Ordered a few essentials. A used couch, 2 twin beds, a coffee maker. Every night, I sat at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and checklists mapping our exit like a secret mission. Tyler and Harper had no idea. My parents were too busy praising Levi's intelligence for knowing where his nose was. And then one day I overheard them, Tyler and my dad, talking over coffee in the living room. "I think we might just stay through the holidays," Tyler said casually. "The house renovation's delayed anyway." My father grunted. "You're always welcome here, son. This is your home, too." I stood frozen by the doorway holding a bag of groceries. And in that moment, I realized the truth I'd been denying for far too long. This was never my home again. It was time to stop surviving in someone else's narrative. It was time to start writing our own. The morning everything snapped began like any other Tuesday. I'd just finished a 12-hour overnight shift, exhausted slightly, numb but relieved that I'd made it through without a code blue. As I parked in front of the house, I was mentally preparing to crawl into bed for 4 precious hours of sleep before school pickup. That's when I noticed it. Several garbage bags were lined up near the garage. Some were half-zipped, revealing familiar things. Mason's dinosaur comforter, Caleb's beanbag, a stack of sketchbooks with bent corners. I blinked, unsure if I was hallucinating. Inside the house was quiet. Too quiet. My heart pounded. I walked through the living room. Levi's toys were everywhere. Harper's laptop open on the kitchen counter, and the smell of her floral shampoo lingering in the hallway. But my kids were nowhere to be seen. I headed downstairs. That basement had always been damp. A cracked window barely let in light, and when it rained, it reeked of mildew. We used to store holiday decorations and tools down there. It was never meant to be lived in. Yet there they were. 2 twin beds shoved into corners. Suitcases on the concrete floor. Mason sitting cross-legged under a bare bulb, sketching quietly like nothing was wrong. Caleb was unpacking socks into a cardboard box labeled dresser. They both looked up at me, unsure of how to react. "Grandpa said this is our new room," Caleb muttered, "because Levi needs space upstairs. It's just for a while." Mason added, "It's okay, Mom, we can handle it." Handle it. Handle being exiled to a moldy, unventilated space while a baby with a 4-bedroom house gets the best rooms upstairs. I didn't say a word. I walked up the stairs 1 step at a time, fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. In the kitchen, Harper was stirring oatmeal. My mother was sipping coffee at the counter. "Why are my kids in the basement?" I asked, voice level but low. My mother barely looked up. "We needed to make adjustments. Harper's working from home now and needs a quiet space for meetings. Plus, Levi's started crawling." I blinked. "And you thought shoving 2 growing boys into a freezing, unsafe basement without so much as a conversation with me was reasonable?" Harper didn't flinch. "It's temporary. Kids are adaptable." "They're not stray furniture," I said louder now. "They're my children." My mother frowned. "Don't be so dramatic, Rachel. They'll be fine." That was it. The moment, the line I couldn't unhear. The dismissal of their worth. The total absence of regret. I stared at them both and nodded slowly. "Okay." Then I turned around, walked downstairs, knelt in front of my sons, and said the only 3 words I could manage without choking. "Pack your things." Caleb blinked, all of them. "Only what matters," I said. "We'll come back for the rest later." They didn't ask questions, they didn't cry, they just moved. We went upstairs. I passed my father in the hallway. He looked surprised. "Where are you going?" I smiled politely. "Out." He raised a brow. "Don't be ridiculous, you're upset. It's just a sleeping arrangement." I stopped walking. "You moved my children into a moldy basement without my consent. You told them they didn't deserve to stay in their rooms. That's not a sleeping arrangement. That's exile. You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said, looking him dead in the eyes, "you just have no idea what proportion actually looks like when you're not the one suffering." He scoffed. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." I almost laughed. That word again, repay. As if I hadn't paid in full every day with my labor, my silence, my dignity. "Come on," I told the boys as we loaded into the car. From the rearview mirror, I could see them looking back at the house our not home with something that wasn't quite sadness. It was relief. That night we stayed in the guest room at Naomi's place. She had already made the beds and left warm towels folded on a chair. Caleb turned to me just before falling asleep. Are we ever going back? I shook my head gently. Only when we're treated like we matter. And for the first time in years, I meant it. The next morning I woke up in Naomi's guest room to the smell of cinnamon toast and the sound of my boys quietly giggling in the hallway. For a moment I forgot where we were. Then I remembered. We were safe. Naomi had 2 dogs, both old and gentle, and Caleb was sitting on the floor, letting one lick his face, while Mason showed the other his sketchbook. The lightness in their voices, the way they moved without flinching or looking over their shoulders, it struck me harder than I expected. It was like watching them exhale for the first time in months. Over breakfast, Naomi placed a cup of coffee in front of me and said softly, "You did the right thing." I nodded, though I wasn't fully convinced yet. Leaving hadn't been the hard part, staying gone would be. That house, no matter how toxic it had become, was still where I tucked my kids in for nearly 2 years, where I rebuilt myself after the divorce, where I'd swallowed every insult in silence just to keep the peace. But peace wasn't quiet. Peace was dignity, and I was finally learning to choose it even when it came at a cost. Later that afternoon, I called in a personal day from work. Then I loaded the boys into the car and headed back to the house to gather more of our belongings. My stomach twisted as we pulled into the driveway. My father was outside watering the lawn as if nothing had happened. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. So he said flatly, "You're really going through with this." I didn't answer. Caleb and Mason each carried a backpack, and I had brought a couple of empty totes. We walked inside without a word. My mother sat at the dining table, eyes rimmed red. "You could have at least talked to us before storming out like that," she whispered. "You could have talked to me before moving my kids into a moldy basement," I replied. "But here we are." She looked away. Caleb and Mason went upstairs and began packing their room. I followed them to help fold clothes, wrap fragile keepsakes, and label boxes. Mason carefully packed the sketchbooks that had once been pushed aside. Caleb found the savings chart crumpled in a drawer and silently smoothed it out before tucking it in his backpack. Downstairs, Harper was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Tyler. Maybe that was for the best. As I hauled the first box to the car, my dad followed me out. "Rachel, don't do this," he said. "This is still your home." I stopped, turned. "It hasn't been for a long time." "You're just upset." "No," I said, holding his gaze. "I'm finally clear." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You really think this is what's best for the boys? Uprooting them, living in some rented shoebox with no support." And here came the moment I'd been waiting for. "I make $72,000 a year, Dad. I've paid off my car. I have a clean credit score and 0 debt. I've been saving since the day I moved in here. The house we're moving into next week, it's not a shoebox. It's ours." He blinked, stunned. All this time they'd seen me as the failure, the girl who came home with 2 kids and no husband, the burden, the weak one. But they never saw the hustle, the overtime, the budgeting, the quiet sacrifices, the strength it took to leave not just the house, but the role they'd trapped me in since childhood. "You were planning this behind our backs," my father asked. "I was planning our future." "There's a difference." He said nothing. As I packed the last box, Mason walked up beside me and tugged on my sleeve. "Can we still hang the chart in the new house?" he asked. I knelt beside him and smiled. "Not only that, we're starting a new one, with new goals." And right then, right in that driveway, surrounded by silence, I slipped in a whisper, half a plea, half a promise. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've had to build yourself back up in the shadows, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, because maybe it's time the rest of the world saw you. This was no longer just my story. It was ours. The day we officially moved into the rental felt surreal. It wasn't glamorous. The yard was patchy. The walls were beige and uninspiring, and the faucet in the kitchen dripped a little more than it should. But it was ours, or at least it wasn't theirs. That distinction meant everything. Naomi and 2 other nurses from work showed up with folding chairs, a used toaster oven, and a bottle of cheap champagne with a note to freedom. Caleb and Mason sprinted into their new room like it was a playground, even though all it had at the moment was a couple of inflatable mattresses, their backpacks, and a stack of boxes. It didn't matter. They were grinning like they'd just arrived at Disneyland. There was no mold in the corners, no baby monitors buzzing, no Harper telling them to keep it down, just space and air and possibility. Later that night, we ate pizza straight out of the box on the living room floor. The boys took turns choosing songs to play off my phone, and we danced around the empty room like kids at a sleepover. For the first time in months, I heard Mason laugh, really laugh. That bubbling, unfiltered joy I hadn't heard since before the basement. And yet underneath the joy, I couldn't help but feel the quiet ache. Because while we had gained peace, we'd also left a part of ourselves behind. No matter how justified cutting ties with family leaves scars, especially when they don't think they've done anything wrong. The next morning, I found a text from my mother. "Just want you to know we're hurt. This could have been handled differently. You've always been so emotional." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because for the first time I didn't feel the need to defend myself. 3 days later, they showed up unannounced. I had just dropped the boys at school and was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when I saw their car pull up. My stomach twisted. They stood at the door, a casserole dish in my mom's hands like this was still the 1990s, and we were pretending to be a normal family. "Can we come in?" my dad asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. They looked around almost surprised that the house wasn't a disaster, that it had furniture, that I had made it work. My mom even muttered smaller than I imagined. "It's enough for us," I replied simply. We sat down at the small dining table, and my father got straight to the point. "Rachel, this has gone far enough. You've made your statement, but the kids don't keep them from their family." I stared at him for a long beat. "I'm not keeping them from anyone. I'm keeping them from being belittled, from being told they're less important, from being moved like furniture to make space for someone else's baby. That's not family." "We love them," my mom whispered. "Then show it," I said. My father sighed, leaning back. "Maybe we didn't realize how it looked from your perspective." I raised an eyebrow. "You think—" He looked older than I remembered, more tired. The weight of realization, perhaps, or just the absence of control. "I'm not saying we did everything right," he admitted, "but we were just trying to help your brother through a rough patch. And in doing so, you helped push us out," I replied. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was honest. Before they left, my mother turned back at the door. "Will you come for Sunday dinner next week, just the way we used to?" I paused, then nodded. "We'll come. But things will be different. There will be boundaries. And if those aren't respected, we leave." She nodded slowly. "Understood." As I closed the door behind them, I exhaled deep and long. The kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding until you finally let go. We weren't fully healed. But the wound had finally been acknowledged, and for now, that was enough. The following Sunday dinner felt like walking into an old theater, familiar set, same cast, but a different script. Caleb and Mason were quiet but composed as we stepped through the door. The dining table was set as always, but this time there were no loud declarations about Levi's newest milestone, no baby toys spread across the centerpiece. It was as if someone had told them to dial everything down a few notches. I had a guess who Aunt Lorraine. She was there that evening, my father's sister, sitting at the end of the table with her signature watchful eyes. She'd always been a quiet ally. One of the few who had pulled me aside at family gatherings and whispered, "You're doing a good job, sweetie. Don't let them make you doubt it." Dinner started out restrained. My parents asked the boys about school. Harper forced a smile when Mason mentioned he was trying out for the school play. Tyler actually nodded when Caleb said he'd gotten a perfect score on a science quiz. But the tension underneath it all was undeniable. I saw it in the way my father gripped his fork a little too tight. I heard it in the way my mother over-explained every choice she made in the kitchen. I felt it in the way Harper barely spoke. And then came the moment. Tyler raised his glass again, same smug energy from the last dinner we attended months ago. To moving forward, he said, clinking his glass with my dad's. Caleb, sitting next to me, gave me a side glance. I could see the question behind his eyes. "Do we pretend everything's fine now?" I smiled back gently, not quite. Halfway through the meal, Aunt Lorraine cleared her throat. "You know, Rachel, the boys look healthier, more confident." My mom's fork paused midair. "They've been sleeping better," I said simply. "And having their own space to study and play helps." Mason looked down. Caleb's grip tightened on his water glass. "They never should have been in that basement," Lorraine added flatly. A beat of silence. Then Harper broke it. "We were all just trying to make it work." "No," I said, calm but firm. "You were trying to make it work for you. My sons were treated like second-class citizens in a home where they once felt safe." Tyler looked ready to interrupt, but Aunt Lorraine held up a hand. "Let her speak." I hadn't expected support from anyone tonight, but there it was. A small act of grace. I turned to my parents. "I know you believed you were helping Tyler. I know you thought Ethan needed more, but but you forgot something crucial: my children needed to be seen, heard, protected, and not once did either of you stop and ask yourselves if they were okay with all the changes. You just assumed they'd adapt. My mom's voice was small. We didn't think it would hurt them. It did, I said barely above a whisper. But worse than that, it made them question their worth. Caleb finally spoke. I used to love being here, but then it felt like I had to earn space to exist. My father looked at him like he'd been slapped. Mason added softly, and we didn't do anything wrong. The room was silent again, but this time it carried weight, not discomfort, but reflection. Tyler finally spoke. Look, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it had gotten that bad. Harper gave a quick nod. We were overwhelmed. That doesn't excuse it, but I get it now. I didn't forgive them in that moment, but I appreciated the honesty. Dinner ended with an awkward but sincere effort at conversation. Mason got to talk about his role in the school play. Caleb showed Lorraine one of his new comic sketches. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As we drove home, the boys were quiet again, but it was a softer quiet. One filled with thought, not tension. Mason finally said, "Do you think it'll ever go back to the way it was?" I shook my head. No, but that's not a bad thing. It means we're not ignoring the truth anymore. And if you've ever had to rebuild a relationship with boundaries, if you've stood up not to destroy, but to demand respect, then I hope you leave a comment and share your story. Sometimes healing starts not with forgiveness, but with finally being heard. About a month into our new life, something changed in Caleb. It was subtle at first, a little more bounce in his step, a bit more energy when he came home from school. But one afternoon, he burst through the front door, breathless, holding a permission slip like it was a golden ticket. Mom, Ms. Watson, invited me to the district STEM program. She said she sees real potential in me. I blinked at the words. Not because I didn't believe in him, I'd always known how bright my son was, but because I realized how long it had been since he believed it. Later that evening, Mason curled up next to me on the couch, head on my shoulder, while we listened to music. He was humming along to a tune from a cartoon he used to love, but had stopped watching for months. You seem lighter lately, I said. He nodded, then whispered, It feels like we're not walking on eggshells anymore. I didn't say anything. I just kissed the top of his head and let the silence speak. At school, their teachers began noticing changes too. Caleb was more engaged in class discussions. Mason, who had once withdrawn completely from group activities, was now volunteering for roles in class plays. The principal even emailed me to ask what had changed at home, because the boys are thriving. I smiled when I read that. Thriving, what a word. It had taken months of quiet damage to erode their confidence, and only a few weeks of stability to start bringing it back. Meanwhile, Tyler and Harper, I hadn't heard much, but Aunt Lorraine was always good at relaying the family updates during our occasional check-ins. They moved back to their house, she told me during a coffee visit. Renovations unfinished, by the way. Your mom said it was too much for her to keep up with everything, especially without you there to help. That part made me pause, of course. Without the person they quietly leaned on without me, they were forced to confront the realities of parenting, of managing a household, of cleaning up after themselves without a silent cleaner in the background. Lorraine sipped her coffee and added, Your mom said she misses the boys, that the house feels quieter now. I raised an eyebrow. Quiet like peaceful or quiet like empty? She smiled. I think she's still figuring that out. I didn't say what I was thinking, that they had chosen that silence, that they had silenced my children first in 100 small ways. But I also didn't feel angry anymore, just clear. One Saturday morning, Mason sat by the window watching the neighbors rake leaves. He turned to me and asked, Do you think it's okay if we send Levi a drawing, just to say hi? It caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to still care. But then I remembered Mason always had a soft heart. He wasn't angry the way I was. He missed people even when they didn't deserve it. Of course, I said. If it makes you feel good to do it, that's reason enough. He got to work right away drawing Levi as a tiny superhero with sparkles coming from his hands. Caleb helped him tape it into an envelope. And when I dropped it in the mailbox, I felt a strange blend of emotions, sadness, nostalgia, hope. That afternoon, I caught myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I rested. Not because I had to conserve energy or because I was too emotionally drained to do more, but because I felt safe. Calm, like I wasn't waiting for the next small blow to fall. And when I looked around our little rental, the thrifted rug, the hand-me-down chairs, the secondhand bookshelf, I didn't see lack. I saw peace, ownership, roots. If you've ever had to create a new life from the ashes of someone else's neglect, if you found strength in starting small, drop your story in the comments. Not every battle ends with fireworks. Some end with quiet healing and a front door that only opens for love. It was a rainy Wednesday when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, probably a robocall or a hospital shift swap, but something told me to answer. "Hi, Rachel, it's Melissa, Harper." Her voice was thin, uncertain, like someone tiptoeing across a cracking floor. There was a pause. "I just wanted to say, thank you for the drawing Mason sent. Levi carries it around the house like it's a treasure. He even tried to put it on the fridge with spaghetti sauce." I laughed quietly. He always did like superheroes. Another pause. "Tyler and we didn't realize how much the boys cared, or how much they were hurting." Her words were careful, as if testing whether they'd be received with suspicion or forgiveness. I wasn't sure what to give her, so I said nothing for a moment, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. Then she added, "It's been harder than we thought being back home. We don't have help now, and honestly, I don't know how you managed it all alone." That part landed, because the truth was I had managed. I had worked double shifts, folded laundry at midnight, reheated cheap dinners 3 nights in a row, and still found time to tape Mason's artwork to the bathroom mirror. I'd handled chaos while being treated like a burden, and she had the nerve to be surprised. But strangely, I didn't feel angry, just distant, like I had outgrown something, and only now realized how small it always was. "We're figuring it out," she said eventually. "Tyler's working late a lot. I'm still remote. Levi's in daycare 3 days a week now." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "That sounds real." She chuckled softly. "Yeah, real is right." We ended the call on neutral terms. Not friends, not enemies. Just 2 women who had finally stopped pretending they lived in the same world. When I told Mason later that Harper had called, he simply asked, "Did she say thank you?" She did. "Okay," he said, then returned to his sketchbook. That was enough for him. That weekend, I took the boys to the community center's fall festival. There were hay rides and cider and a photo booth with silly props. Caleb won 2nd place in the pumpkin carving contest. Mason got to show his superhero drawings at the kids' art display. As we walked home under a sky smeared with orange and purple, Caleb turned to me. "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa will ever come to something like this?" I hesitated. "I think maybe, if they want to." He kicked a pebble down the sidewalk. "I kind of miss them sometimes. But I don't miss how they made me feel." That sentence hung in the air like smoke. "I know," I said, "and you're allowed to feel both." And then he asked something I'll never forget. "Mom, if someone treats you badly, but they're family, is it okay to still love them?" I looked at him 10 years old, wiser than I'd ever been at his age. "Yes," I said, "you can love them. You just don't have to let them keep hurting you." Mason chimed in. "It's like drawing a superhero with a force field. You still see the villain, but they can't get in." Exactly. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep, I sat on the couch with my planner and flipped to the upcoming month. The lease would renew in a few weeks, and I already knew the answer I'd sign again. This little rental, with its peeling linoleum and loud water heater, had become home in a way the sprawling family house never had. Because here we weren't temporary guests. We weren't second place. We were seen. If you've ever stood at the edge of love and self-preservation, unsure which to choose, know this: you're not wrong for picking both. You can love from afar. You can forgive without returning. And you can build a life that keeps only what lifts you. Let me know in the comments if you've ever drawn your own force field. Maybe someone else needs to hear how you did it. 3 months after we moved out, something unexpected happened, something that in the whirlwind of survival I'd stopped believing was possible. I got promoted. It came in the form of a quiet conversation in the break room. My supervisor, Maria, pulled me aside after a back-to-back shift that had left me drained but proud. "You've held this place together more times than anyone's counted," she said, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "We're restructuring the department. I want you to be the new charge nurse." I blinked at her. "Wait, me?" She smiled. "Yes, Rachel. You. You're calm under pressure, you advocate for your patients and your team, and you've been doing the work of a charge nurse for over a year without the title. It's time." My eyes burned with tears I didn't let fall. Because it wasn't just a title. It was a door swinging open that I'd been banging on silently for years. It meant stability, a raise, more consistent hours, time to be present for Caleb's science fair and Mason's fall concert. It meant breathing room not just financially, but emotionally. That night, I told the boys over dinner, frozen lasagna and garlic bread, our little celebration. "So," I said, feigning casual guess who just got a raise and doesn't have to work nights anymore. Caleb looked up mid-bite. Mason gasped. Are we getting a dog? I laughed. One miracle at a time, buddy. We ended the night watching an old Disney movie, all three of us piled on the couch under one giant blanket. And for once, I didn't fall asleep from exhaustion before the credits rolled. The next morning, I bought flowers and dropped them off anonymously at the school's front office with a note thanking Caleb's teacher for her patience and Mason's music teacher for believing in his talent. Because those two had seen my boys when others didn't. Meanwhile, news of our move and my promotion had started circulating through the extended family. Aunt Lorraine texted a heartfelt congratulations followed by a quiet, told you they'd come around someday. I wasn't sure who she meant. My parents, the world. Then one Sunday afternoon, the boys and I returned from the park to find a note taped to our door. We drove by and saw the boys' artwork in the window. The house looks lovely. We'd love to visit sometime if you're open to it. Mom. I stared at the handwriting, neat, unapologetic, but maybe sincere. Caleb read over my shoulder. Do you want them to visit? I took a breath. Maybe, but only if they come to see us, not to fix us. Mason looked up. Can we make a list of rules for when they come? I smiled, absolutely. We sat at the kitchen table and made a list on a sticky note. No yelling, no ignoring, no saying that's not how we do it. Say something nice to both kids before dessert. Simple, but powerful. I sent my mother a message later that night, short, clear. We'd be open to a visit on our terms. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I didn't expect an immediate reply, and I didn't get one. But the act of sending it was enough. It reminded me that the control I'd fought so hard to reclaim, I still had it. And if you've ever had to build boundaries from scratch, piece by painful piece, leave a comment. Let someone else know it can be done. Because we don't always get apologies, we don't always get change, but we can get peace, and sometimes that's the most powerful ending of all. 2 weeks later, my parents showed up at our door right on time. They'd texted first, exactly as requested. We'd love to stop by Sunday at 2 p.m. if that still works for you. No assumptions, no surprise visits, just a small but significant shift in how things had always been. As I opened the door, my mom stood with a modest box of chocolate chip cookies and a cautious smile. My dad held a small pot of marigolds, my favorite flower, though I couldn't remember the last time I told him that. Hi, my mom said. Hi, I answered, stepping aside. The boys were in the living room building a Lego spaceship. They looked up when their grandparents walked in, but didn't rush to hug them. They didn't know how to feel. I didn't blame them. We brought treats, my mom offered, holding up the box. Thanks, Caleb said, polite but guarded. My dad cleared his throat. These are for your windowsill, he said, placing the marigolds down by the kitchen light. They need sun. I watched Mason watch him. He said nothing, but I saw the wheels turning behind his eyes. This wasn't about flowers or cookies. It was about whether the people who hurt you could ever be something more than their mistakes. We sat down around the kitchen table. There was no big speech, no carefully written apology. But slowly over the next hour, my parents began to ask the right questions. How's school? What are you drawing these days? Can we come see your play? They didn't talk over the boys. They didn't mention Tyler. They didn't offer unsolicited advice. It wasn't perfect. My mother still flinched a little when Mason talked about how much better he slept here. My dad made a comment about the neighborhood that made me bristle, but for once he noticed and corrected himself. I mean, it's quiet. That's a good thing. Small steps. When they left, Caleb looked at me and asked, was that real, or were they just pretending? I hesitated. I think they're trying, and trying is a start. The next week, my mom texted me a photo of a bookshelf she'd found at a yard sale. Would the boys want this for their books? She asked. No assumptions. No, we'll bring it over tomorrow. Just a simple question. It felt like breathing in after holding my lungs tight for 2 years. Meanwhile, things continued to blossom in our new home. Caleb's science project won first place at the district fair. Mason's school counselor emailed to say he'd opened up about wanting to start a graphic novel club. These weren't just milestones, they were recoveries, proof that growth happens when you stop living in someone else's shadow. One evening after washing dishes, I found myself staring out the kitchen window at the pot of marigolds. I used to think I needed validation from my parents to feel like a good mom, that their approval would somehow make this journey easier. But I realize now I didn't need their permission to be strong. I just needed the space to be myself. If you've ever rebuilt your sense of worth one brick at a time, if you've stood in your own kitchen and realized you no longer needed someone else's praise to feel proud, drop a comment. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits quietly with marigolds on the windowsill and says, "This is mine, and it's enough." The greatest freedom I ever claimed wasn't moving out. It was finally knowing that I didn't have to move back. The morning of Mason's school play, we were running late. The house was chaotic. Caleb couldn't find his belt. Mason's costume had a loose seam, and I was trying to fix it all with one hand while holding a lukewarm travel mug of coffee in the other. It was the kind of morning that would have triggered snide comments at my parents' house, something about poor time management or how I wasn't raising the boys with enough discipline. But here in our small cluttered rental, it just felt like life, messy, loud, real. Mason stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his cardboard knight's helmet. "Do you think they'll come?" he asked, not looking at me. Who I played dumb, though I already knew. "Grandma and Grandpa?" I paused. "They said they would. But if they don't, we'll still be there. Front row. Loudest clappers in the room." He nodded slowly. "Okay." At the school auditorium, Caleb and I took our seats. Third row center. The room buzzed with parents and cell phone cameras. The principal welcomed everyone. Lights dimmed. And just before the curtain lifted, I saw them. My parents. Standing awkwardly at the back of the auditorium, scanning for seats. My dad had actually combed his hair. My mom clutched her purse like it was a shield. They spotted us and waved timidly. I nodded, gestured to a pair of open chairs a few rows behind us. They came, they showed up, and they stayed for the whole thing. Mason was spectacular. Nervous, yes, but brave. When he delivered his one line, "Fear is just the shadow of a choice you haven't made yet," he looked right at us, at me, and I swear I felt his voice in my bones. After the play, we met him in the hallway. Caleb tackled him in a half-hug, half-celebration. I handed him a Gatorade and a candy bar. My dad approached, hands in his jacket pockets. "You were good up there," he said, clearing his throat. Strong voice. Mason's eyes lit up, but he didn't say anything, just nodded. Then my mom knelt slightly and opened her arms. "May I?" Mason hesitated, then stepped in. She hugged him tightly, her face buried in his shoulder. "We're really proud of you," she whispered. And I stood there watching the three of them. The mother who once told me my kids were too sensitive. The son who once cried himself to sleep in a damp basement. The fragile, painful distance between them, now stitched together by a line in a school play and a choice to show up. That night back home, I tucked Mason in. He lay there smiling, the program from the play still in his hands. "They came," he whispered. "They did. I think maybe they're learning." "I think maybe we all are," I said. Then he turned to me, serious. "But if they don't keep trying, we don't have to keep letting them in, right?" I smiled, brushing his hair off his forehead. "Exactly. That's the lesson I never got growing up. That love and boundaries can live in the same house. That showing up isn't enough if it comes with harm. That we can forgive, but we don't have to forget the cost of silence. If you've ever given someone a second chance but made them earn it, share your story. Let someone else know it's okay to be cautious, to protect your peace, to let people back in only if they deserve to stay. Because being a parent doesn't mean tolerating everything. Sometimes it means teaching your children what love should actually look like. Even if you're learning it for the first time, right alongside them." Spring arrived slowly that year, like a guest unsure whether they were truly welcome. The mornings were still cool, but the afternoons warmed up just enough for the boys to drag their bikes out of the garage and spend hours riding up and down our quiet street. One evening, as I was watering the tiny tomato plant, Mason insisted we try to grow in a cracked pot on the back patio. Caleb walked outside and handed me a flyer. "Open house this Saturday," he said. "There's a place for sale just down the block. 3 bedrooms. It even has a backyard." I laughed. "Are you house hunting now?" He shrugged. "Just thought it might be cool if we didn't have to move again." That sentence struck something deep. We'd been in this rental for nearly a year. It had become home not because it was glamorous, but because we'd filled it with safety boundaries and warmth. Still, it wasn't truly ours. And my sons, even at their young age, understood what temporary felt like. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, I pulled up the listing on my laptop. It was modest, a single-story older house with peeling paint and outdated cabinets. But the foundation looked solid. The backyard was fenced. It was in the same school district, close to the hospital. The price made my stomach flip, but when I ran the numbers and consulted my credit report, something wild occurred to me. I could do this. I called Naomi the next morning. "You ready to stop renting?" she asked, no hesitation. "Terrified," I replied. "Good," she said. "Means you're thinking big enough." Within a week, I had a pre-approval letter and a scheduled walkthrough. When I brought the boys to see it, they raced through the empty halls like explorers discovering a lost temple. Mason claimed the room with the biggest window. Caleb found a small corner in the garage and said, "I can build my model rockets here." The house wasn't perfect, but it was us. I made an offer that afternoon. 2 days later, it was accepted. I didn't tell my parents right away. I didn't need to. But word spread. Aunt Lorraine texted a flurry of heart emojis. Tyler surprisingly emailed a simple congrats. And then a week later, my father called. "Do you want me to come with you for the inspection?" he asked carefully. I hesitated. He added, "I've been through it a few times. I know what to look for." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't I was wrong, but it was something. Sure, I said I'd appreciate that. We met at the house 2 days later. He wore his old work boots, carried a clipboard, and walked around the place like a man on a mission. "The roof's got maybe 5 years left," he muttered. "Water heater should probably be replaced soon." I nodded, scribbling notes. He didn't comment on my choices, didn't lecture, just helped. As we stood by the front porch afterward, he surprised me again. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Buying a house on your own, that's not small." I looked at him startled. He wasn't looking at me, just staring at the yard like it might reveal something deep and unsaid. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered. "I know I haven't always been fair," he added, "but I'd like to do better." That moment wasn't a fix. It didn't erase the past, but it laid a brick in something new: respect. And for the first time, I let it sit. I didn't minimize it. I didn't question it. I just said I'd like that too. If you've ever built something for yourself and then had someone finally see you, not who they wanted you to be, but who you are, share that win in the comments. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it pulls up in work boots, says the right thing at last, and helps you check your foundation, both literal and emotional. The day we closed on the house, the boys were at school. It felt oddly symbolic, signing the final papers alone in a quiet office. No fanfare, just initials and legal documents on recycled paper. But as the notary slid the last form across the table, I felt it rise inside me anyway, a wave of something fierce and earned. I was no longer someone renting peace. I owned it. On the way home, I stopped by the new house, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside with the keys still warm in my hand. The space was still empty, echoing, but I could already hear laughter. I could already picture Caleb's rockets on the shelves, Mason's superhero drawings taped on the walls. I took a picture of the keys in my palm and sent it to the boys with a simple text, "Welcome home." That afternoon, we celebrated in the most us way possible, with takeout burgers on the hardwood floor and root beer in mismatched mugs. The boys kept walking from room to room like they didn't quite believe it. "This is ours," Caleb asked for the 5th time. "All ours," I said. He grinned, then added, "So, does that mean I can pick the color of my walls?" Within reason, I smiled. Mason pointed to the empty backyard. "Can we plant another tomato?" "Let's make it 2. Over the next few weeks, the house began to fill. Not with things we didn't have much, but with life. Our friends helped paint the bedrooms. Naomi donated a used coffee table. Aunt Lorraine dropped off a casserole and a second-hand reading lamp. Slowly, room by room, we built something that didn't just look like a home, it felt like one. And somewhere along the way, the past started to feel smaller. Not erased, not forgotten, just no longer in control. I'd kept my promise to my kids. I gave them a place where they could breathe, and they in turn gave me something I hadn't realized: I'd lost my voice. Mason came home from school one afternoon and told me he'd stood up to a classmate who kept teasing another boy during lunch. I told him, "You don't get to make someone feel small just because you feel big." I blinked. "Did you come up with that?" He shrugged. "Kind of. I remembered how I used to feel." I hugged him so hard he laughed and said, "Mom, I need air." Caleb, meanwhile, joined the school's student council. He'd always been observant, now he was becoming brave. "I told the principal they should put more funding toward the art club," he said one evening, "because kids like Mason deserve supplies too." I'd raised not just survivors, but advocates. And I thought this is the real inheritance I wanted for them. Not heirlooms or old houses or family names. Just the belief that they belonged. One night, while we were all curled up on the couch watching a movie, Mason looked over at me and said, "Mom, do you think Grandma and Grandpa are proud of you now?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about that in weeks, and it made me realize how little I needed that answer anymore. "I hope so," I said. "But what matters more is that you are." He smiled sleepily. "I am. If you've ever broken a generational pattern, created safety from chaos, or turned a rental into a refuge, leave a comment. Not because you owe anyone proof, but because maybe someone else out there is still dreaming of that moment. That moment when their child finally looks at them and says, "I'm proud of you too." The first night in our new home that felt completely normal came 6 months after we'd moved in. No more cardboard boxes in the corner. No more makeshift furniture or paint cans waiting to be used. Just us 3 plates of spaghetti on a secondhand dining table, 2 backpacks hung neatly by the door, and a dog-eared novel I'd been too tired to finish sitting on the couch. Mason had just finished practicing for his school's spring music recital. His clarinet was finally staying in tune most of the time. Caleb was helping me prep ingredients for lunches that week, slicing cucumbers with exaggerated precision like he was on a cooking show. It was all so unremarkable, and I'd never felt more grateful. That night, after putting the boys to bed, I sat out on the back porch with a cup of tea. The backyard was quiet, except for a single owl in the distance. The stars shimmered above me, not city-blurred, but sharp and real. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't thinking about what might go wrong tomorrow. I was just here, present, whole. The next morning, I got a call from my mom. "We're coming by," she said. "Don't worry, we asked this time." When they arrived later that afternoon, they brought groceries, flowers, and unexpectedly a folder of family photos. Old ones. Some I hadn't seen in decades. "I thought the boys might want to know where they come from," my dad said quietly. We sat together at the kitchen table, flipping through snapshots of my childhood me in pigtails at my 4th birthday, Tyler with a crooked smile holding a fishing pole my parents in the early days of their marriage, full of the kind of youthful hope I once thought was gone. And then, nestled between photos, I found something else, a handwritten letter. From my mom. It wasn't long, it wasn't poetic, but it was raw. She wrote about the guilt, the blindness, the excuses she had told herself to avoid seeing what was right in front of her. "I thought we were helping Tyler. I didn't realize we were erasing you." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just acknowledged the damage. And sometimes that's all you really need. When the boys came home, Mason gave his grandmother a shy hug. Caleb asked if they'd stay for dinner. No one cried. No one made a speech. We just ate together in the house that had become our healing ground. Later that night, as I tucked them into their now familiar beds, Mason asked, "Do you think we'll always live here?" "Maybe not always," I replied, "but long enough to remember how far we came." He smiled. "I like it when we stay." Caleb added, "It feels like us." And that's when I knew. I had done it, not just moved, not just survived, but healed in front of my children beside them and because of them. We hadn't just broken free from a toxic household, we'd rewritten the meaning of home. A home isn't measured by square footage or zip code. It's measured in how freely your children laugh, how safely they sleep, how confidently they speak up knowing they'll be heard. It's built moment by moment in the quiet courage of choosing better even when it hurts. If you've ever found yourself rebuilding from the ground up, if you've fought for a future your kids didn't yet know they deserved, drop your story in the comments. You never know who's watching, who needs to believe that freedom exists. And maybe your words will be the reason someone else finally says, "Pack your bags, we're going." The journey from silence to voice, from tolerance to dignity, from surviving to belonging, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens when you choose yourself, when you choose your children, when you stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it, and when you finally build a life where love doesn't require shrinking. If you're watching this and you've been told, just endure it, or family is family, hear this: you are not required to stay where you are, unloved or unseen. You can walk away. You can build again. You can plant tomatoes in a cracked pot on a porch that belongs to you and watch them grow wild and free, just like the life you're choosing. And if this story touched you, reminded you of your own journey, or gave you hope for one you haven't started yet, leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that every person has the right to a home where they're valued, not just tolerated, subscribe to this channel. Join this space of stories, survival, and second chances. Because sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is start over.